Captain William Hartwell had been standing guard at Rosewood Palace for 23 years. His black boots were always polished to perfection, his red uniform pressed without a single wrinkle, and his expression never changed from its serious, professional look. The other guards called him the Stone Wall because nothing seemed to move him. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, William would take his position outside the main palace doors. He had watched 3 generations of the royal family pass through those doors. He had seen kings and queens, princes and princesses, but he always kept his distance. That was his job, to protect, not to befriend. On this particular Tuesday morning in late autumn, the air was crisp and golden leaves danced across the palace courtyard. William stood perfectly still, as he always did, watching the grounds with sharp eyes. He had been awake since 4 in the morning, as was his routine. His wife Sarah had made him breakfast, kissed him goodbye, and reminded him that their grandson Tommy was coming to visit that weekend. At exactly 7:30, the palace doors opened. Usually this meant the royal staff was beginning their day. But today something was different. Instead of the usual servants, a small figure appeared in the doorway. Prince Alexander, who was only 9 years old, stepped outside. He was still wearing his pajamas, blue ones with little sailing ships printed all over them. His dark hair was messy from sleep, and he was carrying something in his small hands. William's training told him to remain still and silent. Royal family members often walked through the palace grounds, and guards were taught to be invisible unless needed. But something about the young prince caught his attention. The boy looked around nervously, as if he was doing something he shouldn't be doing. His big brown eyes scanned the courtyard until they landed on William. Instead of running back inside like most children might do when they saw the stern guard, Prince Alexander walked straight toward him. William felt his heart skip a beat. In 23 years, no member of the royal family had ever approached him directly while he was on duty. He kept his eyes forward and his face expressionless, just as he had been trained. "Excuse me, sir," the little prince said in a soft voice. William's eyes moved down to look at the child, but he didn't move his head or speak. Protocol was protocol. Prince Alexander seemed to understand that the guard couldn't talk to him, so he continued. "I know you're not supposed to move or talk when you're working. My father told me that you're very important and that you keep us safe." The boy held up what he had been carrying. It was a steaming mug of hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows floating on top. The sweet smell filled the cold morning air. "I was having breakfast in the kitchen with Cook Margaret, and she told me that you stand out here every morning, even when it's really cold. She said you probably get hungry and thirsty, but you can't leave your post." William felt something strange happening in his chest. In all his years of service, no one had ever thought about whether he was cold or hungry while on duty. He stared down at the small prince, who was looking up at him with such genuine concern. "I asked Cook Margaret to make you some hot chocolate," Prince Alexander continued. "I know you can't drink it right now because you're working, but maybe you could have it later. I made sure she put extra marshmallows in it because my grandmother says everything is better with marshmallows." The little prince set the mug down carefully on the stone ledge next to where William was standing. He was so small that he had to stand on his tiptoes to reach it. "I also brought you this," he said, pulling a chocolate chip cookie from his pajama pocket. It was slightly crumbled, but it had been wrapped in a napkin with care. "Cook Margaret says these are the best cookies in the whole kingdom. I saved it from yesterday because I thought you might like it." William felt his throat getting tight. He wanted to say thank you, wanted to tell this kind little boy how much this meant to him, but he couldn't break protocol. All he could do was watch as Prince Alexander stepped back. "I hope you have a good day, sir," the prince said with a small wave. "Thank you for keeping my family safe." As the little boy walked back toward the palace doors, he turned around one more time. "Oh, and my name is Alexander, but my friends call me Alex. I hope we can be friends someday." William watched as Prince Alexander disappeared back into the palace. The hot chocolate sat steaming beside him, and the wrapped cookie felt warm in his pocket where the boy had gently placed it. For the first time in 23 years of service, Captain William Hartwell felt tears threatening to spill from his eyes. Not because he was sad, but because a 9-year-old boy had shown him more kindness in 5 minutes than he had received from anyone in the royal family during his entire career. The morning passed differently than usual. Other guards who walked by noticed the mug of hot chocolate, and word began to spread through the palace staff about what Prince Alexander had done. William could hear whispers and see smiles from the servants who passed through the courtyard. When his shift finally ended at 2 o'clock that afternoon, William carefully picked up the mug. The hot chocolate was cold by now, but he didn't care. He unwrapped the cookie and took a small bite. It was indeed the best cookie he had ever tasted. That evening, when William arrived home, he told his wife Sarah everything that had happened. She listened with tears in her eyes as he described the little prince's kindness. "In 23 years, Sarah," William said, his voice shaking slightly, "no one has ever thought about me as a person. I've always just been the guard, the uniform, the protection, but today a little boy saw me as a human being who might be cold and hungry." Sarah reached across the dinner table and took her husband's weathered hands in hers. "What are you thinking, William?" William stared out the window at their small garden, where they grew vegetables and flowers together. "I'm thinking that maybe it's time for this old soldier to hang up his uniform." The next morning, William arrived at his post with mixed feelings. He had barely slept, thinking about Prince Alexander's simple act of kindness. As he took his position by the palace doors, he wondered if yesterday had been just a one-time thing, or if the young prince might appear again. At 7:45, the palace doors opened. Prince Alexander stepped out, this time properly dressed in his school uniform, but in his hands was another steaming mug. "Good morning, Mr. Guard," the boy said cheerfully. "I brought you tea today. Cook Margaret said some people prefer tea to hot chocolate, so I thought we should try both." William's heart melted completely. The little prince had remembered him, had thought about him, had cared enough to bring him another warm drink. This time, Prince Alexander also brought a small plate with buttered toast cut into triangles. "Cook Margaret made this special toast with real butter and honey," the prince explained as he set the plate down. "She said it's important to eat breakfast, especially when you have to stand outside in the cold." The boy paused and looked up at William with those innocent brown eyes. "I asked my father about you yesterday. He told me your name is Captain Hartwell and that you've been protecting our family since before I was born. He said you're the bravest and most loyal guard in the whole palace." William felt his chest swell with pride, but also with something deeper, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Prince Alexander continued, "I told my father that I think you must get lonely standing out here by yourself all day. He said that being a guard is a very important job, but that it can be lonely sometimes." The little prince stepped closer and lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret. "I get lonely sometimes, too. Even in a big palace with lots of people, sometimes you can feel alone. That's why I wanted to be your friend." As Prince Alexander walked back to the palace for his morning lessons, William noticed something else. Cook Margaret appeared in one of the kitchen windows and gave him a small wave. She had never acknowledged him before, but today she smiled warmly and nodded at the tea and toast. Throughout the day, other staff members began to notice William differently. The head gardener stopped to ask if he needed anything. A young maid brought him a small umbrella when clouds gathered overhead. Even the postal delivery man commented on how nice it was to see someone caring for the guards. Word of Prince Alexander's kindness had spread throughout the palace. The royal staff, who had always been focused on their duties, suddenly began to see the guards as real people with real needs. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Every morning, Prince Alexander would appear with something warm to drink and a small snack. Sometimes it was soup in a thermos, Other times it was fresh fruit or sandwiches. The little prince would always take a moment to chat, telling William about his lessons, his pets, or funny things that had happened in the palace. On Friday morning, something extraordinary happened. Prince Alexander arrived with his usual offering, but this time he wasn't alone. His younger sister, Princess Isabella, who was 6 years old, walked beside him carrying a small bouquet of flowers she had picked from the palace gardens. "This is my sister Isabella," Prince Alexander said proudly. "I told her about you, and she wanted to meet you too." Princess Isabella stepped forward shyly and held up the flowers. "These are for you, Mr. Captain," she said in a tiny voice. "Alexander told me you keep us safe, so I picked you the prettiest flowers I could find." William looked down at the small bouquet of daisies, roses, and baby's breath. His hands trembled slightly as he remained in position, unable to accept the gift directly, but his eyes showed all the gratitude he felt. Prince Alexander gently placed the flowers in a small vase he had brought and set it on the ledge beside William's usual spot. "There," he said, "now you have something beautiful to look at while you work." That afternoon, when William's shift ended, he picked up the vase of flowers and carried it home to Sarah. When he told her about Princess Isabella's gift, Sarah began to cry. "William," she said softly, "in all the years you've worked at that palace, have you ever felt truly appreciated?" William thought carefully about her question. He had received commendations, pay raises, and recognition for his service, but appreciation, the kind that made him feel valued as a person rather than just as an employee, never. "Not until this week," he admitted. That weekend, William's grandson Tommy came to visit just as planned. Tommy was 8 years old, full of energy and curiosity. Over dinner, William found himself telling Tommy about Prince Alexander and Princess Isabella. "Grandpa," Tommy said, "they sound really nice. Are they like regular kids?" William smiled. "Yes, Tommy. They are exactly like regular kids. They're kind and thoughtful, and they care about other people's feelings." "Maybe when I grow up I can be friends with them," Tommy suggested. William realized something important in that moment. These royal children weren't just names or titles to him anymore. They had become real, caring human beings who had touched his heart in a way he never expected. On Sunday evening, as William prepared his uniform for the coming week, he found himself moving more slowly than usual. Each piece of his uniform felt heavier somehow. The brass buttons that he had polished thousands of times seemed to gleam less brightly. Sarah noticed his mood. "What's troubling you, my dear?" William sat heavily on their bed, holding his uniform jacket. "I keep thinking about what those children have shown me this week. For 23 years, I thought my job was just about standing guard, following orders, staying invisible. But those little ones have shown me that kindness matters more than protocol." He paused, looking out their bedroom window at the garden where they had planned to spend more time together after his retirement. "Sarah, I've been thinking about when I want to retire. I always planned to serve for 25 years, but lately I feel like my heart isn't in it the same way anymore." Sarah sat beside him and took his hand. "Because of the children's kindness?" "Because they've reminded me what really matters in life," William said. "Connection, caring about others, being seen as a person, not just a job title. I want to spend more time with you, with Tommy, with the people who matter to me." William looked at his reflection in their bedroom mirror. He saw a man who had spent decades being invisible, who had forgotten that underneath the uniform was someone who deserved kindness and friendship. "I think," he said slowly, "I think those children have given me the greatest gift of all. They've reminded me that I'm not just Captain Heartwell. I'm William. I'm a husband, a grandfather, a person who deserves to be treated with warmth and respect." Sarah squeezed his hand. "So what will you do?" William smiled for the first time in days. I'm going to finish this week properly. I'm going to thank those beautiful children for showing me what real nobility looks like. And then I'm going to submit my retirement papers. As he hung up his uniform for the night, William felt lighter than he had in years. Tomorrow would bring another day of standing guard, but it would also bring the beginning of the end of his long career. And it would all be because two small children had shown him that the greatest strength isn't in standing rigid and emotionless, but in opening your heart to unexpected kindness. Monday morning arrived with unusual nervousness for William. He had made his decision over the weekend, but he hadn't yet told anyone at the palace. As he took his position by the doors, he wondered how to explain his choice to leave when everything seemed to be going so well. Prince Alexander appeared right on schedule, carrying what had become their morning tradition, a warm drink and a smile that could light up the entire courtyard. "Good morning, Captain Heartwell," the boy said, using William's proper name for the first time. "I learned your real name from my father. I hope it's okay that I use it." William's heart swelled. Hearing his name spoken with such respect and affection by this young prince meant more than any formal recognition he had ever received. "I brought you something special today," Prince Alexander continued, setting down not just tea but also a small wrapped package. "It's not much, but I made it myself in art class." The package contained a hand-drawn picture. It showed a tall figure in a red uniform standing proudly outside a castle, with a bright sun shining overhead and flowers growing all around. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "Captain Heartwell, my hero." William stared at the drawing, feeling emotions he had kept buried for decades rising to the surface. No medal, no commendation, no official recognition had ever meant as much as this simple picture drawn by a 9-year-old boy. "Do you like it?" Prince Alexander asked anxiously. "I tried to make you look brave and strong, like you really are." William wanted desperately to break protocol, to kneel down and hug this wonderful child, to tell him how much his friendship had changed everything. Instead, he did the only thing he could do. He looked directly into Prince Alexander's eyes and gave the smallest, most grateful nod he could manage. The prince understood immediately. His face broke into the biggest smile William had ever seen. That afternoon, William requested a meeting with Colonel Matthews, the head of palace security. In the colonel's office, surrounded by certificates and photographs of royal events, William made his announcement. "Sir, I would like to submit my resignation effective at the end of this week." Colonel Matthews looked shocked. "Resignation? William, you're one of our most reliable guards. Is everything all right? Are you ill?" William chose his words carefully. "No, sir. I'm not ill. I've just realized that it's time for me to step down and spend more time with my family." "But you're only 47 years old," the colonel protested. "You have many good years of service left." William smiled gently. "I've had an excellent career, sir, but recently I've been reminded that there's more to life than duty and protocol. I want to be present for my family while I'm still young enough to enjoy them." Colonel Matthews studied William's face. After 30 years of military service, he could recognize when a soldier had made up his mind completely. "If this is truly what you want, William, then I'll process your paperwork. You've been an exemplary guard and you'll be greatly missed." "Thank you, sir. I'd like to finish out this week properly if that's acceptable." "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Word of William's resignation spread quickly through the palace staff. Cook Margaret was the first to approach him during his lunch break. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you really leaving us?" William nodded. "It's time, Margaret. Time for a new chapter." Cook Margaret smiled sadly. "I'll miss seeing you out there every morning. You've been like a steady presence, always reliable, always there." "Thank you for all the kindness you've shown me, especially this week," William replied. And thank you for helping Prince Alexander with all those morning treats. That boy has a heart of gold, Margaret said. He's changed all of us, hasn't he? Made us remember to look after each other. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur of quiet goodbyes and well wishes from staff members who had never spoken to William before this week. The young maid brought him a thermos of soup for his last cold days on duty. The gardener left fresh flowers in the vase that Princess Isabella had given him. Even the postal delivery man shook his hand and wished him well. On Thursday morning, Prince Alexander arrived looking troubled. "Captain Hartwell," he said quietly, "I heard some of the grown-ups talking. They said you're leaving the palace. Is that true?" William felt his throat tighten. He had been dreading this conversation all week, knowing it would be the hardest part of his departure. The little prince's eyes filled with tears. "Did I do something wrong? Are you leaving because of me?" William's heart nearly broke. If he could have spoken at that moment, he would have told Prince Alexander that he was leaving precisely because of him, because this beautiful child had reminded him what kindness looked like, had shown him that he deserved to be treated as a human being, had given him the courage to choose happiness over duty. Instead, William did something he had never done in 23 years of service. He slowly reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. On it, he had written a message the night before. He handed the paper to Prince Alexander, who read it carefully. "Your Royal Highness Prince Alexander, your kindness has given me the greatest gift of my life. You have shown me that I am not just a guard, but a person who deserves friendship and care. Because of you, I am retiring to spend more time with my family, something I should have done years ago. You have taught me that the most important thing in life is not following rules, but following your heart. Thank you for being my friend. With deep respect and affection, Captain William Hartwell." Prince Alexander read the note twice, his lips moving silently with each word. When he finished, he looked up at William with tears in his eyes, but also with understanding far beyond his 9 years. "So you're not leaving because you're sad," the boy said slowly. "You're leaving because I helped make you happy." William nodded, and for the first time in decades, he allowed a tear to roll down his cheek while on duty. Prince Alexander carefully folded the note and put it in his pocket. Then he reached up and placed his small hand on William's gloved hand, which was resting on his ceremonial sword. "I'm glad I could help you find your happiness, Captain Hartwell," the prince said. "Will you remember me?" William nodded again, more vigorously this time. "Good," Prince Alexander said, "because I'll never forget you. You're the bravest person I know, and not just because you're a guard. You're brave because you chose to be happy." Friday morning, William's last day, arrived with unexpected ceremony. As he took his position for the final time, he noticed unusual activity around the palace. More staff members than usual were moving through the courtyard, and several other guards had gathered nearby. At exactly 8 o'clock, the palace doors opened wider than usual. Prince Alexander emerged, followed by Princess Isabella, but they weren't alone. Behind them walked the king and queen themselves. William felt his knees nearly buckle. In 23 years, the king and queen had never approached him directly while he was on duty. The small procession stopped in front of William. Prince Alexander stepped forward with a large, beautifully wrapped package. "Captain Hartwell," the king said in his deep, formal voice, "my son has told me about the friendship you have shown him this week. He has also shown me the note you wrote, explaining why you have chosen to retire." The queen smiled warmly. "Alexander has requested that we give you a proper farewell, as befits someone who has served our family with such dedication." Prince Alexander held up the package. "This is from all of us," he said, "but mostly from me, because you're my friend." Inside the package was the most beautiful photo album William had ever seen. The leather cover was embossed with his name and years of service. Inside were photographs of every major royal event he had guarded over the past 23 years. Weddings, birthdays, state visits, ceremonies. But on the last page was something that took his breath away. It was the drawing Prince Alexander had made, but now it was professionally framed with a brass nameplate that read, "Captain William Heartwell, a true friend to the royal family." The king stepped forward. "William, your service has been exemplary. But more than that, you have shown my children what true character looks like. You have taught them, through your example, about dedication, loyalty, and grace under all circumstances." And, the Queen added softly, "they have taught you about the importance of kindness and human connection. This exchange has enriched all of our lives." Princess Isabella stepped forward with her own small gift, a single white rose from her garden, and a tiny note that simply said, "Thank you for being nice." Prince Alexander looked directly into William's eyes. "I know you can't talk to me right now because you're still working," he said, "but after today, when you're not a guard anymore, maybe we can be regular friends. Would you like that?" William felt every emotion he had ever suppressed during his years of service flowing through him at once. Joy, gratitude, love, and a deep sense of completion filled his heart. For his final act as a palace guard, William did something that would have been unthinkable just 2 weeks earlier. He slowly removed his ceremonial hat, placed it under his arm, and spoke directly to the royal family for the first time in his career. "Your Majesties, your Royal Highnesses," he said, his voice strong despite his emotions. "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve your family. And Prince Alexander, Princess Isabella, it would be an even greater honor to be your friend." Then, with tears flowing freely down his face, William knelt down and embraced both children, who threw their arms around him as if he were their beloved grandfather. The assembled palace staff burst into applause. Cook Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. Even Colonel Matthews, who had served in 3 different armies, had to clear his throat several times. As William walked away from the palace gates for the final time, carrying his gifts and wearing civilian clothes, he felt lighter than he had in decades. His retirement began not with sadness, but with the joy of knowing that he had touched 2 young lives, and they had forever changed his. 6 months later, William received a hand-delivered invitation to Princess Isabella's 7th birthday party. At the bottom, in Prince Alexander's careful handwriting, was a personal note. "Please come, Mr. William. It won't be the same without our friend." William smiled as he showed the invitation to Sarah and Tommy. He had chosen happiness over protocol, love over duty, and friendship over formality. It had been the best decision of his life. The little prince had been right all along. The bravest thing anyone can do is choose to be happy.